Hi, my name is Yii Heng, and I'm an upcoming PhD student at LSE Law School, and this is Lepas Sekolah.
Which high school did you go to and what exam board did you take?
I went to international school and I took the IB, the International Baccalaureate, and that is an A-level equivalent.
Do you remember what papers you did for IB?
I did history, language and literature, and Chinese higher level.
Do you remember your extended essay?
I don't remember the specifics, but it was about the Second World War.
Yii Heng, where did you go for undergrad and what did you study?
I went to Liverpool University for undergrad and I studied law.
Why did you choose to do law?
Well, I've always wanted to do history, but I was a bit worried about future career prospects, and law was the closest thing to history intellectually and academically.
And why would you say that law is similar to history?
Well, law is similar to history intellectually. They both require similar skills, critical analysis, academic review, reading, and I thought that those were the things that I quite enjoyed.
Why did you choose Liverpool specifically?
There wasn't a specific reason, I guess. It was on a whim. Like many undergraduate students, I had a choice of 5 universities in the UK for UCAS, and that was just how it ended up being.
Did you enjoy studying at Liverpool?
Yeah, I did. I didn't regret being at Liverpool at all.
What about Liverpool did you enjoy?
In terms of the city, I guess everyone there was quite nice to me. It's not as big as the other UK cities like London or Manchester, and so there was a bit more sense of people knowing each other and people being tight.
I recall you saying you went to an international school. Did you mean you grew up outside of Malaysia?
Yes, I grew up in China where my family moved to for work reasons, and that was where I went to school.
Would you say being a Malaysian is an intrinsic part of your identity and how you choose to self-identify?
Being in China, yes, I think that was the case. In school, we were encouraged to display our culture, especially international school where there were many people from many other different countries. And I guess being Malaysian was sort of something that distinguished me from the other students.
So did this sense of Malaysianness carry over into your university life?
Well, like many Malaysians in going overseas for university, we often try to seek out other Malaysians in our university. I, of course, like many other of my fellow Malaysians at other universities, tried to participate in the Malaysian societies and to find Malaysian friends. But this was quite difficult.
Why was it difficult for you?
It was difficult mainly because I was one of the only Malaysian students first year. I applied directly to Liverpool University. Many Malaysians at Liverpool came in their second or third years through the 2+1 transfer programs. And so by the time the Malaysians came on board, many of them had formed their own friend groups, and it was quite difficult to break into them.
Was this a particular point of regret for you in university that you were not able to form many Malaysian friends from Malaysia?
It wasn't necessarily a huge regret, but it was definitely something that lingered on for a bit. But I was also able to make friends with local students as well, and that helped me cope with not being able to make many Malaysian friends.
How would you suggest people coming from relatively homogeneous friend groups try to break out of their friend groups and make more diverse friends?
Just speak to other people. For example, if you know somebody is going to an event that you're going to, try not to stay with them too much, or perhaps just give it a shot. I made some friends through just speaking to people, and that was it really.
Alright, then moving away from the slice of life stuff, what was your favorite module in Liverpool Law School?
My favorite module was actually European Union law, specifically EU constitutional law. EU law includes many different areas: trade law, aspects of criminal law, and also very importantly administrative law, and also things such as commercial law as well.
Would you say it's essentially the laws governing the European Union?
Essentially, yes, it governs the EU as an organization and also a sort of quasi-federation.
That's interesting. What about EU constitutional law specifically did you enjoy?
Well, I really enjoyed the complex relationships between the different EU institutions and also its member states. That dynamic really interests me, and also the way that the law regulates those dynamics and how those institutions use and instrumentalize the law for their own benefit and ends.
Briefly, could you explain what these dynamics entail and why is it about it that you find so fascinating?
These dynamics include relationships between the EU Court of Justice and its member states, and the broader struggles in the rule of law and also in democratic backsliding, especially in EU member states that have less stellar democratic and also human rights record.
Would you say your interest in this module is affecting your career choices now?
Yes, I would say that. The reason why I'm interested in constitutional law now was because of my interest in EU law, which included, incidentally, constitutional law.
Oh, so you moved away from just EU constitutional law to constitutional law more broadly?
Yes. I moved from EU constitutional law more broadly into comparative constitutional law and also domestic constitutional law.
You said earlier on that you are an incoming PhD student. I would assume you've done your master's then?
Yes.
And when did you do your master's?
I did my master's from 2023 to 2024, so it was a 9-month program.
So was this straight out of undergrad?
Yes.
And where did you do your master's?
I did my master's at Cambridge.
What was your master's on? Was it constitutional law?
It was a general Master of Law, but the papers I took during the Masters reflects my interest in both constitutional law and international law.
Could you just highlight some of the more interesting modules or papers that you did in Cambridge then?
The paper that I really enjoyed the most was International Law of Global Governance, and in that paper we were taught about international institutions and the laws that regulate them, and also the laws which regulate countries internationally.
So how big of a jump was undergrad to master's?
I would say it was a bit above third year of undergrad. So in that sense, the jump wasn't that large. However, the content and the level of thinking we were required to do for the masters is certainly quite a step up.
I heard in Cambridge there are different kinds of masters that you could do. Is this true?
Yes, many different types.
You know how there are like MScs, MPhils, LLMs, MAs. Could you briefly explain what these different kinds of masters are? What's the difference between them?
Well, it really depends on the university and their own system of grading and courses. But at Cambridge, most master's degrees are called MPhils. That doesn't mean that they're all masters of philosophy, but that's just what their title was. There are also specific types of other masters, like the Master of Letters, and that's a research degree where you spend a year writing sort of a mini dissertation, a mini project, and that's essentially a mini PhD.
All right then. Could you explain what led you to Cambridge?
The reputation is what led me to Cambridge. It was probably the best shot I had to pursue the career that I wanted to. However, I did also have some other backup plans in case being at Cambridge didn't work out for me.
How was your academic performance in Liverpool? And did it influence your ability to go into Cambridge or be accepted into Cambridge?
I graduated with a first-class degree from Liverpool, and I would say that was essentially the determining factor of whether I got into Cambridge.
Did you get a first for all 3 years in Liverpool, or was it just your aggregate?
Yes, I achieved first-class marks on all my modules in Liverpool.
Would you say getting a first on all of your modules or getting a first overall is important to be able to get into an Oxbridge uni?
It depends on the course, but specifically for the LLM, academic performance is very important, especially in traditional universities like Oxbridge, where they do value academic performance.
Does this mean had you not gotten a first, you would have had to go to a different university instead?
Yes, I would say that would most likely be the case. So I had applied to LSE, UCL, and Edinburgh, and those were my backup choices in the event I didn't get into Cambridge.
And you would have focused on constitutional law in all of them?
Yes, very similar subjects, since all those universities are known for their constitutional scholars.
If I'm understanding this correctly, you did a research-based master's, correct?
It was a thought master's program, but with a dissertation component that I chose.
Okay. What was your dissertation component on?
It was on Malaysian public law, specifically the basic structure doctrine, and that's an area of constitutional law.
For someone interested to know what basic structure doctrine is, could you briefly explain what that is?
It's the idea that a written constitution has certain features, ideals, or principles that can never be replaced through amendment.
Could you give an example of what these features are within the Malaysian context?
In the Malaysian context, some scholars have stated that principles such as the rule of law, democracy, and the fundamental rights are aspects of the Malaysian constitution that can never be erased.
Okay, fascinating. So, did you carry this over into your PhD?
I carried the broader questions over to my PhD to some extent.
Okay, before we talk about your PhD and what you did after masters, I think our audience would be interested to know about your Cambridge life as well. How was life at Cambridge?
Academically, it was very busy. The Faculty of Law is known for its international law and also its private law aspects. So there was plenty to do there. Socially, it was also quite busy. Cambridge is known for its various societies, very exclusive clubs, and also the very famous formals and the other social aspects of the colleges.
How did you spend your non-academic time in Cambridge?
I joined some college societies and I played some sports at the college, and I also attended other college formals and dinners.
What are formals? Could you explain them?
The Cambridge formal is an occasion where students and the fellows of the college come together in a dining hall. They wear gowns and suits and also fancy dresses, and then they sit together and eat dinner.
What would you say is something that you would never forget about Cambridge?
All the pain and suffering.
That's a very realistic answer, and I appreciate the frankness. How was Cambridge vis-a-vis Liverpool?
City-wise, Cambridge is a lot more quiet. Definitely not as bustling as Liverpool. In terms of the university itself and a campus experience, definitely very different. Liverpool is a campus university, and so everything was in one spot, whereas Cambridge is made out of different colleges and faculties. You had to belong to one of the colleges during your studies at Cambridge, and that made a lot of difference in terms of social life and also academically.
Could you explain how being in colleges and being on campus in Cambridge has helped you socially speaking compared to Liverpool?
In Liverpool, everything was quite large and disconnected, and this is true for many campus universities with quite a lot of students. However, at Cambridge, because you were forced into a college, it was more easy to meet many people from different backgrounds and also make more friends that also enjoyed your own hobbies and interests as well.
And how did you do for your masters at Cambridge?
I achieved a first-class degree.
What did you do after masters? Did you go straight into your PhD?
After my master's, I'm actually studying the bar vocational course at the moment, and that is essentially what you need in order to qualify as a lawyer in Malaysia.
So why did you choose to do the bar if you're planning on being an academic?
To be frank, it was for pragmatic reasons. Being an academic isn't easy, and the process of becoming one requires lots of hard work, many risks, and so doing the bar course was simply a matter of having a backup plan in case pursuing a PhD or becoming an academic didn't work out.
That's very pragmatic. Would you say the possibility of being a lawyer is higher than being an academic?
Definitely, yes. Academia at the moment, especially in the UK, is very competitive and not very high paying at all.
We can talk about academia later on. Now I'm interested to know how different the bar course is compared to doing a traditional master's.
They're quite different. In your undergrad and postgraduate law degrees, like the Bachelor of Law and the Master of Law, they teach you what the law is, what the academic aspects of it are, and all the issues that people have with it. However, the bar course doesn't teach you any of that. It teaches you how to navigate through the law and the legal system. So on the bar course, you are essentially learning how to sue other people. You're learning how to fill in endless number of forms that the law requires, and you're also learning soft practical skills such as learning how to advise other people of the law and also how to conduct yourselves in court.
Having experienced both the practical and academic sides of the law in formal study, which parts of the law would you say you find more interesting?
I found the academic aspects more interesting, and that is, of course, self-explanatory from my desire to pursue an academic career. The practical aspects of it, they are important, but they do require you to memorize and know many of the different legal procedures and the other drier aspects of the law, essentially.
You said earlier on that you are a bar student and that you are also an incoming PhD law student. Could you just quickly clarify which stage of the process are you in right now?
Yes, so I've just finished my bar course exams, so I'm just waiting on results for those. And then in terms of the PhD, I've received an offer and also funding. So now I'm waiting for my exam results so that I can proceed with visa applications and also enrollment at LSE.
Why did you choose to do it at LSE?
Well, firstly, LSE is known for the kind of work that I want to do, and the overall research direction of LSE suits my PhD proposal. Second, connected to the first, the supervisors I wanted to work with were at LSE.
So, would it be correct for me to suggest that your supervisors are some of the best constitutional law professors in the UK right now?
They are quite prominent constitutional theorists and scholars, yes.
In applying for PhD programs, was the choice of supervisor or the choice of university more important to you?
The choice of supervisors, I would say, is the most important. After all, you are spending the next 3 to 4 years working with them and be working with them to sort of plan the direction of your own project. And so choosing supervisors that understand what your project is and also supervisors that you can work with are the most important.
If you're giving advice to someone who's beginning their PhD application process, what would be the first advice you give them?
Do some wider reading on what you want to do specifically, and also to tailor your proposal, the PhD proposal, to the supervisor that you want to apply to.
Does this mean in making your PhD applications, you had different PhD proposals for the different universities / professors you were applying to?
I had a few different proposals, but they weren't too different. They were all still on broadly the same topic, but many people choose to have different proposals, yes.
Could you explain what your PhD topic is?
Yes, so my PhD topic is on coloniality and legality. My work on coloniality and legality, it focuses on the way which the West has transplanted different legal systems and constitutions on colonial states, and the way which colonial impositions continue to impact on the way which law is perceived, applied, and also made in those post-colonial states today.
To illustrate, could you give an example of how that translate within the Malaysian context?
In the Malaysian context, many of our laws continue to be colonial legacies. Most notoriously include the Sedition Act, and previously that includes the Internal Security Act.
Thank you for introducing your PhD topic. Now I'd like to ask some practical questions about PhD applications. To someone who's looking to apply, could you briefly explain how the process works? How is it different compared to a master's application or to an undergrad application, for example?
For humanities PhDs, like the one I applied to, I would say that the most important thing is your proposal. That sort of proposal will include the subject, topic, and also the new area of research that you want to explore during your PhD. In that sense, it is different from a master's application, at least a thought master's, because instead of simply applying with your grades, you are specifically applying for a project that you want to do during your PhD.
Overall, what would you say was the biggest challenge you face in making your PhD application?
Probably time management and balancing commitments. So I was doing the bar course at the time I was applying for PhDs, and it was quite difficult for me to balance both adequately, because the PhD proposal does require a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, a lot of work, and the bar course similarly requires quite a lot. Struggling to balance both was the biggest obstacle to me applying for the PhD.
How about funding? Was funding a factor at all in making your PhD applications?
Funding was a huge factor for my PhD applications, and that is because if I hadn't got funding, then I wouldn't be doing the PhD at all in the first place, especially within the field of humanities. Unlike STEM, PhDs in humanities are sometimes not funded, and also funding can be quite difficult to come by.
What were the sources of funding that you considered?
Sources of funding I considered came from many different sources. So some of them were department or university related funding, and in the UK, the most students would perhaps apply for funding from the Arts and Humanities Council.
Could you explain what the Arts and Humanity Council is?
The Arts and Humanities Council includes grants which are given by the Arts and Humanities Council, which is a body in the UK that's responsible for humanities research.
Could you break down the funding that you received and
I applied to 3 different sources of funding, and I received 2 sources in 2 different universities. The first was at LSE, and the funding came from a PhD studentship by the department, so that is funded by the university. The second source of funding is in Liverpool, and that was given by the UK Arts and Humanities Council through the Northwest Doctoral Training Program.
could you break down how much assistance you are receiving from the LSE studentship?
I will receive an annual stipend of 24,871 and a personal annual research allowance of £1,000 and further field research funding, which is also, I believe, another £1,000.
Would you say this is an enough amount to cover your daily expenditures?
It would be just enough to cover them, yes.
You sound like you have your life put together so far with respect to your PhD program, and that's going to take you about 3 or 4 years, right? What are your plans after your PhD?
I do plan on returning to Malaysia, and I do want to try to pursue an academic career in Malaysia.
So why do you want to return back to Malaysia?
Despite studying overseas in high school and university for a significant portion of my life, I still feel that Malaysia holds this sentimental value that I could really never get rid of. And so to me, at least, Malaysia still remains my home. And of course, I do have a desire to go back and contribute.
Speaking as an academic, what about Malaysian constitutional law are you most excited about?
Malaysia as a legal system and its constitutional institutions are unique. However, internationally, comparatively, it hasn't had as much attention as other legal systems. And so there is a lot of potential there for comparative study. And I think Malaysia would be a useful case study for many of these constitutional theories and questions that constitutional scholars are studying or trying to research.
Speaking as an incoming academic, what parts of Malaysian constitutional law do you think deserves more attention from the public?
To me, emergency powers is one aspect of Malaysian constitutional law which is important for the public to know. The nature of the powers, where they come from, who they are exercised by, when they can be exercised. These are things which are important because when the state exercises these emergency powers, they often do so in a vacuum where some legal principles and some rights don't apply. And it's important to ensure that we as Malaysians are conscious of these situations where the government holds such a vast array of power that they can use.
If there's one thing you wish the public would learn more about the law in general, what would it be?
The thing that the public should know more about and be more conscious about is their fundamental rights under the Constitution. More Malaysians should definitely be aware of legal limits to power.
What advice would you give to someone who's considering a career in academia?
The most honest advice and the most frank advice I can give is to not slack off on your studies. To enter academia, good grades are definitely a must.
Finally, could you summarize your journey Lepas Sekolah in 3 words?
Improvise, adapt, overcome. My name is Yii Heng, and this is my journey Lepas Sekolah.
Thank you.